I warned my husband not to take credit for my money. So, after his son excluded me from the $12,500 cruise I paid for, I sold the house out from under them. Days before our dream cruise, my stepson sent a cruel text demanding only his real mother come and called me a poor woman, while my husband simply nodded and walked away with him anyway. My phone buzzed at 5:58 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I'd set an alarm for 6 and the buzz beat it by 2 minutes. Tyler's name lit up the screen. Change of plans. Only my real mother comes on this cruise. Not you. Poor women don't belong on trips like this. I read it twice, lying flat in the dark, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't rearrange. They just sat there glowing, cruel, and grammatically correct. My suitcase was already by the door, packed the night before, tagged with a little silver luggage tag shaped like an anchor. I paid for every stitch of it on my card. I got up and walked into the bathroom. Greg was leaning over the sink, brushing his teeth, still in the navy undershirt he'd slept in. I held the phone up without a word and let him read it over the sound of running water. He rinsed his mouth, spit, set the toothbrush down in the cup we'd bought at a Target that didn't exist anymore. Then his eyes drifted past me toward the hallway, toward my suitcase sitting there with its anchor tag. He nodded. Small, almost nothing. The kind of nod you give a weather report that says it might rain later. Inconvenient. Not worth arguing with. He's stressed about graduation. Greg said, picking his toothbrush back up like the conversation was already closing. I'll talk to him on the ship. Smooth it over. Smooth it over, I repeated. He didn't hear the edge in my voice. Or he heard it and decided, the way he always decided, that hearing it and responding to it were two different jobs and only one of them was his that morning. 20 minutes later, a horn honked out front. 2 short taps, familiar, impatient. I looked through the curtain and saw Tyler already sitting in the driver's seat of the Ford Escape I had been quietly making payments on for 2 years, sunglasses on, radio loud enough that I could feel the bass through the window glass. Greg grabbed his duffel bag off the bed. He kissed my cheek the way you'd kiss a stranger who was holding up a boarding line. Fast and impersonal, already turning away before his lips left my skin. We'll talk when I'm back, he said. I stood in the doorway in my robe and watched the car back down the driveway, watched it swing out onto Elmwood Drive, watched it shrink into nothing at the end of the block. Neither of them turned around. Not once. Not even the fast, guilty glance you'd give a house you were leaving behind for a week. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that because I've told this story enough times now to know people expect the crying part. It didn't come. What came instead was a strange, cold clarity, the kind you get right before you do something you can't undo. I sat down at the kitchen table, still in my robe, and opened my banking app. Not to feel sorry for myself. I promised myself that, sitting there with the coffee maker gurgling behind me and the house gone quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet in 8 years. I opened it to finally look, really look, for the first time without flinching away at what my money had actually been doing in this family and what it had been buying everyone except me. I am 38 years old. I run a small corporate accounting firm out of a converted sunroom 2 blocks from downtown Crestwood, Illinois. A business I built from nothing starting the year I turned 27. Back when I was doing tax returns for bakery owners at their kitchen tables in exchange for whatever cash they had in the register that week. My firm now has 14 regular clients, a full-time assistant named Maya, and a waiting list that embarrasses me a little when I think about how small the operation still is compared to what people assume when they hear I own a business. I bought the house on Elmwood Drive when I was 26, a modest 3-bedroom with a leaky gutter and a kitchen that hadn't been touched since 1992. Priced at $215,000 because the previous owner needed to move fast for a job in Chicago. I put down everything I had, financed the rest over 15 years, and lived there alone for 4 years, eating a lot of ramen and refusing every invitation that cost more than $15. When I was 30, my mother died of ovarian cancer. Fast, the way it sometimes goes. 5 weeks from diagnosis to the funeral home, she left me $75,000 in life insurance. Money she'd been quietly building for 2 decades working as a postal clerk. Money she never spent on herself because she was always saving it for someone. I used almost all of it to pay off the remaining balance on the house. I remember standing in the loan office on a Wednesday morning, signing the paperwork, and feeling like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for 4 years. I met Greg a year later at a Crestwood business mixer I only attended because Maya made me go. He was 51 then, recently divorced, still carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who'd spent 2 years fighting over custody schedules and car payments with a woman who no longer wanted him, but also didn't want to let him go easily. He had a 15-year-old son named Tyler. He talked about that boy the entire night over cheap wine and a cheese plate in a way that struck me as devoted rather than desperate. I liked that about him. I still think, honestly, that it was real. We dated for 2 years before we married. I met Tyler properly about 4 months in. A stiff, watchful boy who called me by my first name and nothing else, who studied me across the dinner table the way you'd study a substitute teacher you weren't sure you had to respect. I told myself that was normal. Kids don't warm up to their parents' new partner overnight, especially not a kid who'd watched his parents' marriage come apart in real time. Greg's divorce had left him in rough financial shape. Sarah, his ex-wife, had run up almost $22,000 in credit card debt during their last 2 years together. Debt that got split in the settlement, and Greg's credit score was still recovering when we got married. That's the reason, or at least the reason he gave me, for why we never refinanced the Elmwood house to put his name on the deed. Let's wait until my credit's cleaner, and if I. He said the year we got married, standing in that same kitchen with the 1,992 cabinets I'd since replaced. No sense doing it twice. I agreed. It made sense at the time. We simply moved him and Tyler into my paid-off house instead of buying something new. And for 8 years, let's wait quietly became we never did. Our wedding was small, 45 guests, held on a Saturday in September at a church that smelled faintly of roses and old wood. Tyler was 15 and wore a suit that didn't quite fit him yet, sleeves an inch too short, and stood beside his father looking like a boy who'd been told to be somewhere, rather than a boy who wanted to be there. I remember catching his eye during the reception, trying to smile at him the way you'd smile at a nervous kid, and he looked away first toward the dessert table. I told myself that was fine, that trust takes time, that 15-year-olds are allowed to be guarded. Update 1. The first year of the marriage was, if anything, gentle. We settled into a rhythm. I drove Tyler to baseball practice twice a week because Greg's schedule at the logistics company ran late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I learned which snacks he'd actually eat and which he'd let go stale in the pantry. I sat through 2 parent-teacher conferences where his freshman history teacher kept calling me mom before Greg gently corrected him each time. I didn't mind the correction. I minded a little that Tyler never once corrected it himself. Never once said, "She's not my mom, but she's here." Which would have cost him nothing and would have meant everything. I want to tell you about the Ford Bronco because, if I'm honest with myself, that was the first crack, the first moment I should have understood exactly what kind of family I'd married into. Tyler turned 17 the November after our wedding. He wanted a car. Greg didn't have $10,500 sitting around, child support and the divorce debt had seen to that. So, I did. Tucked away in a savings account I'd built slowly, dollar by dollar. In the years before I met either of them, I found a used Ford Bronco at a dealership in Peoria. Dark blue, 88,000 miles, $10,500 out the door. I paid for it in full. On the morning we surprised Tyler with it in the driveway, keys tied with a ribbon, Greg stood next to him with his arm slung over his shoulders and said, "Your dad worked a lot of overtime for this one, buddy." I was standing 4 feet away. I remember the exact distance because I remember doing the math on it later. 4 feet, close enough to touch. Close enough that there was no possible way Tyler hadn't seen me standing there when he said it. Tyler turned and hugged him, just him. He never looked my direction at all, not even to say a perfunctory thank you. And Greg never corrected the record. Not that day, and not in the 8 years since. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a lot of things were nothing for a very long time. 2 years ago, Tyler's Ford Escape, the car he'd had since starting college, bought used with a small loan co-signed by Greg, needed a new transmission after the old one finally gave out on the highway. Before that, though, there was the matter of the monthly note itself, in $350 a month, and Tyler was chronically short. Greg came to me quietly one evening in the garage. "Can you just cover his car payment for a while?" he asked. Quietly, though, so he doesn't feel like he owes you. Let me tell him it's coming from the family account. There was no family account. There was my account and there was Greg's, and mine had considerably more in it. I agreed anyway. $350 a month straight out of my checking, timed to hit 2 days before the due date so it would never bounce. 6 months into that arrangement, we were at a 4th of July cookout at Greg's cousin Brenda's house, paper plates and a card table sagging under potato salad. I heard Tyler telling a group of his friends near the cooler, "My dad's been covering my car note this whole time, man, never lets me down." I was standing 8 feet away holding a plate of deviled eggs. He never once looked my direction. Brenda, overhearing, turned to me and said, "Your husband's a good man taking care of that boy like that." And I said, "He really is." Because what else was there to say? The transmission died the following spring. $3,500. A number the mechanic gave Greg over the phone while I sat in the next room doing invoices. Greg came and found me, phone still in his hand, and said, "I don't have it right now, not until payday. Can you wire it tonight? I'll make sure Tyler knows it came from both of us." I wired $3,500 at 11:40 that night, sitting at my kitchen table in the dark. Greg never told him it came from both of us. I heard it secondhand 3 weeks later from Maya of all people, who'd run into Tyler at a gas station. He said his dad pulled $3,500 out of nowhere for him. Said it like it was nothing. Junior year, Tyler hit a snag with his financial aid that left a $7,200 gap between what the university expected and what had actually cleared. Greg called me from his office, voice tight in a way I recognized as panic dressed up as calm. If this doesn't get paid by Friday, they'll drop him from his classes. Can you cover it? I'll pay you back. He never paid me back. And I never asked him to. I moved $7,200 from my business's rainy day fund into Tyler's tuition portal myself. When it was done, Greg said, "Let's not tell Sarah. She'll feel like she failed him if she finds out we had to step in like this." My name hadn't even come up as a possibility for hurt feelings, only hers. The cruise was supposed to be different, a gift freely given. Tyler was graduating with a degree in sports management. Greg floated the idea back in February. 7 nights out of Miami, he said. Bahamas, private island stop, the whole thing. I want to do this for him, for us, really. I found the booking myself. Balcony suite, upgraded dining package, excursion bundle. $12,500 charged in 2 installments to my card because Greg's was still recovering. Always still recovering. I set the whole thing up under my rewards account. I was the family's de facto travel agent the same way I was its de facto accountant. 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, Greg took a work trip to Springfield. I drove down to have dinner with his group. One of Greg's coworkers, a cheerful man named Kevin, leaned across the table and said, "Greg tells us you're taking your boy on some big graduation cruise. That's great, man." Greg smiled and said, "Yeah, figured he earned it. Kid worked hard." I sat there with a fork halfway to my mouth. I had booked the trip, I had paid for the trip. And in that entire sentence, there had been no room made for me at all. Not even a passing "we." 10 days before we were supposed to fly to Florida, I noticed the tone in the house shifting. Tyler had been distant, but this was different. A coldness with an edge to it. I overheard Greg on the back porch. "I know, Sarah, I hear you. It's a family trip and I want it to feel like that." He came inside and wouldn't meet my eyes. Sarah mentioned maybe doing something separate with Tyler before the cruise. Some kind of mother-son thing. I told her we'd figure it out. That same night, Tyler came home from Lily's apartment, his girlfriend of a year and a half, and walked past me in the hallway without a word. Thumbs moving fast on his phone screen. I remember the particular quality of that silence. Heavy, deliberate, the silence of someone rehearsing something. Which brings me back to that kitchen table, coffee going cold, banking app open. I started scrolling back through the transactions methodically. $350 recurring. 24 consecutive months. $8,400. One transfer, $3,500 even. Memo line reading transmission. One transfer to the student accounts portal, $7,200. 2 charges to the cruise line, $4,500 and then $8,000. $12,500 total. I sat with a pen and an actual piece of paper and added the numbers. $31,600 in 2 years. Quietly funneled through my accounts and credited publicly to a man who, 4 hours earlier, had watched his son call me a poor woman and responded by nodding and brushing his teeth. Almost without deciding to, I opened my laptop and pulled up the shared family email address we'd set up years ago for logistics between our house and Sarah's. I wanted to see the cruise confirmation email one more time. But while I was in there, I saw a thread from 3 years earlier that I had never opened. It was between Greg and Sarah. Sarah had written, asking to split costs for Tyler's senior prom. Greg's reply, 3 lines long, stopped my breath. "Don't worry about it. I've got it covered. Vivian doesn't need credit for this stuff. It's easier if Tyler just sees me as the one who provides for him. Keeps things simple." I read it 4 times. It wasn't carelessness. I had spent years telling myself Greg's silence about my money was thoughtlessness. But this email proved it was a strategy. A deliberate, considered choice. Vivian doesn't need credit for this stuff. He had decided that on my behalf. Further down, in another thread from college move-in, Sarah asked about the dorm deposit. Greg replied, "We're fine. Vivian's got the account handled, don't worry about it." My name appeared exactly twice in 3 years. Both times as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be acknowledged. I closed the laptop, I sat very still, and then I picked up my phone and called Chloe, a friend who ran a company that did fast cash closings on residential properties. "Is your company still buying on Elmwood Drive?" I asked. "Always," she said. "What's going on?" "I need to sell my house, this week if it's possible, cash, as is." She was there in an hour. We sat at the kitchen table where Greg would later eat cereal without looking at me. She walked me through the numbers. The house free and clear. Appraised at $290,000. Her company could offer $275,000 cash. Close within 72 hours. No inspection contingencies. "Once we start this," Chloe said, "I'm not slowing down for second thoughts. I've never been more sure of anything, I told her. I signed the preliminary paperwork that afternoon. Then I opened the loan servicing app for Tyler's Ford Escape and canceled the automatic payment I'd set up 2 years earlier. No further payments will be processed. I spent the next 2 days packing only what was truly mine. My mother's jewelry box, her hand-stitched quilt, my grandmother's Bible. I left the mug Tyler had given me 3 Christmases ago that read, "World's okayest stepmom." I left it sitting exactly where it sat on the counter. One box I packed slower than the others. Our wedding album. I sat with it open on my lap for almost 20 minutes before I finally closed it and set it in the box. 3 days after the text, I sat in a quiet office above a title company. Sunlight coming through Venetian blinds, a notary sliding pages across a table toward me. "Congratulations," the notary said, stamping the final page. "The sale is final." By that evening, I was already renting a truck. By the following morning, I was 2 states away, unpacking boxes onto bare floors in a small apartment on the edge of Grand Rapids, Michigan, a city I'd chosen almost at random. Update 2. The ship was due back into Miami on a Saturday. I knew that. I'd booked the whole trip myself. I pictured them driving back to Crestwood from the airport, tan and relaxed, with no idea at all what was waiting, or rather, what wasn't. The call came at 4:12 that Saturday afternoon. I was standing in my new kitchen unpacking a box of mismatched dishware when my phone lit up with Greg's name. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Vivian." His voice was already cracking. "Vivian, what did you do?" "We're standing in the driveway. There's a moving truck here. There's furniture on the lawn that isn't ours. The locks don't work. What is going on?" "I sold the house," I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected, almost gentle. "You sold? Vivian, that's our house. That's Tyler's home. You can't just." "It was my house," I said. "It's been my house since I was 26 years old. Your name was never on that deed, Greg, because you never asked to see it, and I never offered. I found the email you sent Sarah 3 years ago. About the prom. About how I don't need credit for things. About keeping it simple." The line went quiet. In the background, I could hear Tyler's voice, sharp and rising, and then another voice. Sarah, apparently there to pick Tyler up, or drop something off. I heard her say clearly enough to Carrie, "Greg, what is she talking about? What email?" "Nothing," Greg said. Even in the middle of the collapse of everything, his first instinct was still to smooth it over. "It's not nothing," I said, loud enough that I knew it would carry through the phone. "For 2 years, I paid Tyler's car note, $8,400. I covered his transmission, $3,500, wired at midnight because you asked me to and told me you'd tell him it came from both of us. You didn't. I covered a $7,200 gap in his tuition. And you asked me not to tell his mother because you didn't want her to feel like she'd failed him. And days before a cruise I paid $12,500 for, your son told me poor women don't belong on trips like this. And you nodded. You nodded, Greg. And then you finished brushing your teeth." I heard Sarah's voice again, quieter this time, edged with genuine shock. "Greg, is that true?" "I can explain all of it," he said. "I'm sure you can," I said. "I'm not a poor woman, Greg. I'm the woman who paid for absolutely everything in this family and asked for nothing except to be told the truth about it. You had 8 years to say my name out loud in front of your son. You chose not to every single time. I'm done funding a life that keeps making it painfully clear I don't belong in it." I heard Tyler's voice cut in, tight and furious. "This is insane. You're punishing us for a text. You're seriously homeless shaming us over a text." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said, entirely calm. "I'm simply no longer available to be your family's invisible bank account. That's not punishment, Tyler. That's a boundary. You should look up the difference sometime." I hung up. My hands weren't even shaking. What I learned later, mostly from Brenda, came in pieces over the following weeks. Sarah had come because Greg had asked her to swing by with a spare phone charger Tyler had left at her place before the cruise. An errand that put her directly in the driveway at the exact moment the entire architecture of the marriage came down. Brenda told me Sarah stood on that lawn for a long time after I hung up, arms crossed, saying almost nothing, while Greg paced in circles trying to call me back 4 separate times. Greg and Tyler spent that first night in an extended stay America. Sarah offered them her guest room for a few nights out of guilt, but made it clear it wasn't a long-term arrangement. Her husband apparently was not thrilled about hosting his wife's ex-husband and stepson. The car came apart next. Tyler's lender sent a missed payment notice 5 days after I canceled the automatic transfer. By the second missed payment, a repossession warning followed. Greg, for the first time in 2 years, actually paid it himself. Brenda told me it took him 3 separate calls and a payment plan just to keep the escape from getting towed off Sarah's street. I felt a strange, aching relief watching someone finally do under pressure the thing you'd spent 8 years quietly hoping they'd do on their own. Sarah reached out to me directly about 3 weeks later. "I owe you an apology I don't think I can fully make," she said. "I knew he leaned on you for money sometimes. but I always assumed you two had agreed on it together as a couple. I didn't know he was writing emails like that behind your back. I want you to know I never asked him to keep you out of it. I believed her mostly. We left it there. Two women who would probably never be close, but no longer had any reason to be enemies either. Lily, Tyler's girlfriend, texted me separately. She told me she'd overheard enough in the driveway that day to understand finally why Tyler sometimes talked about money the way he did, casually entitled, as if it simply appeared when needed. I'm sorry for how he's treated you, she wrote. I've tried talking to him about it and he mostly just gets defensive. I told her she deserved a partner who understood the difference between being provided for and being handed things without ever learning where they came from. Tyler's friends found out, too. Kevin, the coworker, apparently mentioned the cruise offhand to someone who knew one of Tyler's college roommates. From there, the actual numbers made their way back to campus. Brenda told me Tyler complained to her once that people kept asking him whether it was true his stepmom paid for basically everything, and he just never told anyone. He changed the subject fast, the way people do when a question lands somewhere they'd rather not look. The family split cleanly. Brenda called me on a Tuesday night and told me a story about her own first marriage 20 years earlier to a man who used to introduce her at parties as my wife. She doesn't work. Despite the fact that she'd been running the books for his construction business unpaid for 6 years, I recognized what you were describing the second Greg told me about it, she said. He did it on purpose, Vivian. There's no accident in a sentence like that. Greg's desperate moves started slow and then came in a rush. Texts at 2 a.m. alternating between apology and blame. I never should have let it go on this long. Tyler's just a kid. You're really going to throw away 8 years over this? I answered none of them. Then came the calls to my lawyer, Evelyn. Greg's attorney floated the idea that the house sale constituted marital property. An argument that lasted exactly as long as it took Evelyn to produce the original deed, dated 3 years before our marriage, my name the only one on it, along with 8 years of mortgage-free property tax filings that had never once listed him as an owner. The claim disappeared within a week. The divorce moved quickly. No jointly owned property, no shared mortgage, a modest joint checking account split evenly down the middle. It was finalized in early September. I let myself grieve somewhere in there. Not for Greg, but for the specific family I'd let myself imagine we could be. The one where Tyler eventually grew into a man who understood what had been given to him. The one where Greg learned to say my name in rooms where it mattered. I sat on the floor of my new apartment looking at a photograph from our 3rd anniversary. The two of us laughing on a dock, Tyler rolling his eyes behind us. I let myself cry for the first time. Not for what happened, but for what didn't, and now never would. Tyler texted me once in October. I heard you sold the house. That's messed up, honestly. Hope you're happy. I read it twice, waiting for something in it to soften. There was no apology. No acknowledgement of the $12,500 or the $8,400 or the $7,200. I didn't respond. Some doors are better left exactly where they are, just closed. It's been a little over a year now since I sat at that kitchen table in the gray early light and added up 8 years of my own life on a piece of paper. I still live in Grand Rapids in a different apartment now, one with real hardwood floors and a small balcony. My accounting firm followed me here without missing a single client. It turns out most people don't care where their accountant lives as long as the numbers reconcile on time, and mine always do. I adopted a dog about 6 months after I moved, a scruffy terrier mix from the county shelter. I named her Ledger. Half as a joke about my profession, and half because it felt right. A small, dependable thing that had simply been waiting for someone to notice her worth. Some mornings when I wake up before my alarm, I reach down and put my hand on her just to remind myself that I'm not lying there waiting for a cruel text anymore. There's just a dog and a quiet apartment and a life that is entirely, finally, mine. People ask me sometimes whether I regret how fast I moved, whether I wish I'd given Greg more time to prove he could change. I understand the impulse. We're taught that leaving quickly looks like cruelty, even when staying quietly was the actual cruelty all along. But I think about that email now. Vivian doesn't need credit for this stuff. He wrote it calmly, deliberately, as a strategy for managing his son's affection at my expense. I didn't leave too fast. I left exactly as fast as the truth allowed once I finally let myself see it clearly. I was never the poor woman in that family. I was the only one keeping an honest ledger, the only one who could have told you to the dollar exactly what love was costing me and exactly what it was returning. Everyone else got to live comfortably inside the story they told themselves. I was the one who eventually had to do the math. I feel steady. I feel most days like a woman standing upright in a house that is entirely her own. I still think about that anchor luggage tag sometimes, the one clipped to a suitcase that never made it onto a ship. I don't miss the cruise. What I miss is the version of myself who still believed right up until 5:58 that morning that if she was just generous enough, quiet enough, she would eventually be counted as family instead of funding. I don't believe that anymore. That plain, Unglamorous knowledge that love which requires your erasure to survive was never really love at all, it was just accounting dressed up in nicer language. And I was the only one in the room who ever bothered to check the math.